Good evening. In a sense, I'm quite intimidated because I'm stepping into the shoes of Christine Blower, who we were really looking forward to. I was particularly looking forward to listen to and be inspired by what she would have to say. We are really, what I'm going to be doing is more an analysis of what William Parker says in Microcosm about the threats facing our maintained schools and the position of the NUT within that. What we can do is what I'm trying to do is extrapolate from the experience of William Parker the fundamental challenges and problems that are facing all of us who believe in a nationally publicly owned and democratic education system. And it really is, I think that hits the nail on the head. It's about protecting a democratic and accountable education system, because as we move into this era, this new topography of academised chains, we're looking at that loss of democratic structures. And I think there are several challenges at that macro level which really impact on us. I'm going to first itemise. I think first we have to consider the ideological drive of a politicised Department of Education. And there's no doubt in our experience of William Parker in Hastings that the whole dispute, the whole process was politicised from the outset. And that pressure came to bear on us when DFE consultants were coming into the school. There's also the threat to schools, particularly in areas of multiple deprivation. For schools like William Park, which serves an SOA, what we're facing is actually the ease with which you can be categorised as special measures. And of course, once you're categorised by Ofsted in special measures, that means you can be fast-tracked into privatisation. The process is forced upon you. There is nothing voluntary, there's no opt-in. And there is some evidence, and again I won't push it so far, that obviously it's in denial that Ofsted is independent and neutral from the Department for Education. But if you look at the criteria, you look at the process that's happening, there's some synergy between special measures category and forced academisation. Next, the third challenge is, I'm sorry to say, it's the failure of local authorities. I have to be careful again, I don't want to criticise East Sussex County Council, because in a sense we're wanting to be part of East Sussex Council's school and family of schools. But unfortunately, the problem is for us that they want a divorce. They don't want us to be part of that family. And the reason for that is undoubtedly, again, it's back to the second point, which is the pressure from the Department for Education. Michael Gove wrote to every East Sussex MP in November, just a week before we had the Ofsted inspection, and I quote where he said, "I've asked officials to offer the local authority whatever help it needs to identify the best academy solution for the schools in question." Well, obviously, we were one of those schools in question. The next, I think, national challenge, and in a sense it's local, but it will be replicated, is actually local vested interests. Local vested interests aren't necessarily our friends when we're trying to maintain a school under public ownership. What you have is school governorship. One, school governors, you'd hope, would be on our side. But the experience is that often they're ambivalent, they don't understand, and they're easily swayed by the type of propaganda companies like ARC generate. Equally, we have to think about the networks of parents with cultural and financial capital. Again, within East Sussex as a whole, one, we've got more affluent parents, no disrespect to those from more affluent areas. They have greater financial cultural capital to make their point. We're talking about a deprived area like Hastings. Too many of our parents are actually still intimidated by school itself and can't engage in the way that those with that cultural capital can. And I'm sorry, they're taken advantage of. In this process, they are disenfranchised. So that brings us to then, that's the context. That's the context where on the 26th of March, for the first time ever in the history of the school, there was localised industrial action, not a national dispute, it was localised in William Parker, which was a shock to East Sussex County Council. I didn't expect the NUT to take that step. We were forced into it because East Sussex had refused us an extension on the balloted period of negotiation. They wanted to call our bluff. They wanted to see whether we'd actually take the action or not. But sadly, the reason we even got to that step was that there had been no process of consultation, information gathering at any point. Basically, there's no doubt that once Ofsted had activated the process of forced privatisation, there was always that suspicion in the background that there had been a protracted period of conversation between East Sussex County Council, between school governors and between the department, which then led to basically slot in place the favoured academy chain, which is ARC. Now, I'll leave you to look up Absolute Return for Kids, because they're an interesting model of what a charitable privatising chain looks like. They are a charity, they're not a private company. As we've said, what ARC brings with it is actually the breakup of the national system of paying conditions for teachers. So, moving forward then, once we'd gone into that process, once we've been categorised as in special measures, we were faced with a series of problems. And the first problem was actually trying to recover a voice, because we had no voice whatsoever. We've been taken out, not just teachers but parents. The only people who've been given that voice was the department and the governors and East Sussex County Council. So we had to get that voice within the process. And again, the only way to do that was to use an indicative ballot and then move to a ballot for strike action. I'm proud to say that 70% of members voted, and of that, it was virtually unanimous for strike action. That brings us to the second problem which we face in terms of protecting our schools, which is timescale. The timescale when a school's been ousted and put into special measures is really short. It's truncated purposely to deny, one, union, if they're not organised, to actually ballot members for industrial action, and two, to actually just remove parents out of it. So basically they're presented with a consumer package. Next, there's always a threat within this timescale that the governing body itself will be removed, and governors are threatened in this process that if they don't comply, if they don't capitulate, then they'll be replaced with a docile body directly from the local authority. And again, that threat was put in place to basically steamroll it through. So from the publication of Ofsted in mid-January, the school had been signed off by the governors to ARC by February. So it was that quick, and we had to move ourselves to meet the timescale. The next issue is actually keeping alive the core issue, which is privatisation, when you're being forced to actually fight all the specifics of our contracts. It's how to keep that dichotomy alive. These are really big issues here about democratic control, about what is the nature of education system, when also you're fighting a rearguard action just to protect the specifics of our contracts. That balancing act meant that we had to go out to the catchment area, and you've got examples of the types of leaflets, very teacher style, like banding machines, which we then delivered on the day of strike to all the houses in the catchment area. The fourth problem is the lack of due process. There is no pluralist debate. What I mean by that is because parents aren't given a proper ballot, they don't have to give a ballot for parents. Because there is no proper pluralist structure of consultation, it means that we then don't have a platform to actually engage and create momentum in terms of a campaign. So you have to create it, if you like, grassroots from the union position itself. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to zip through to my conclusion. So, I think as we reflect on trying to campaign against this privatisation, we've got two fundamental problems to summarise those that we've looked at. One, it's the privatisation of the school is about sidelining democratic and transparent processes. There's the problem of compliance of members of the local community and school leaders to a DFE and business agenda. If your chair of governors and your head teacher are brought on side in terms of privatisation process, it becomes much more difficult. And finally, I think despite the work of the Anti-Academy Alliance and pressure group organisation, at the moment, the challenges are too great to cope with. One of the reasons for that is that, in fact, that there is no national political leadership in terms of giving us a framework in which to operate. And that comes back, sadly, to the Labour Party at this moment. That actually, we're all working in isolation, but we're not being provided with that national spokesperson to enable us to actually operate outside of the very closed, sectarian, as we presented, world of the union. And until that comes in place, it's going to be much more difficult for us to win this war. Because at the moment, I have to be honest, from the perspective of where we are, we've been stitched up, we've taken industrial action, we're still going to be privatised. What we've won is guarantees for some of our members in terms of employment. We've gained some flexible guarantees on flexible work and part-time work and maternity, but actually we have lost because the school's going to be privatised. And that brings us to the final warnings we look ahead. I think we need to be more proactive. I think we need to define already now in our local areas which schools haven't in any way moved towards thinking about academy status. Those schools can then be protected, if you like, defence committees of unions and parents working together. So when the academy chain begins to move on, they'll already know that actually the framework's in place for opposition, particularly if that school's facing an Ofsted inspection. Without that preloaded work, we're going to be in a weakened position. So, finally, in microcosm, each battle like Williams Parker is being played out at that macro level through a national campaign, but it will only be when we have a properly articulated political national leadership that we will win this war. Because I'm sorry, as I said, at the moment, we're just not looking at the game. And that's, again, Christine might be saying this, we as a union are having to reorganise and restructure our response. We're no longer dealing with local authorities. Our whole structure is based about locality. We now need to move to begin to deal with national privatising chains like ARC that requires a slightly different structure in terms of the way that the union operates. We've got to take that on board, and actually all of us who oppose privatisation have got to do that as well. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Warren. That was a really illuminating speech.